Chapter 1. The knock at 2 amperes. M. I still remember the sound of that knock, desperate, uneven, like someone pounding against the edge of death. It was 2 a.m., the kind of hour when nothing good ever happens. I opened the door and saw my sister standing barefoot in the snow, blood running down her arms, her little girl trembling in her arms. Her lips were blue, her eyes wild with fear. And before I could even think, before I could reach for the phone, a message from my mother lit up the screen, 4 words that cut deeper than any wound. Don't save her. The first knock didn't sound real at first. It was sharp, uneven, almost like something the wind might do if it wanted to wake the dead. I sat up in bed, blinking into the dark, thinking I'd dreamed it. Then it came again, harder, faster, rattling the doorframe like whoever was out there meant to break it down. I glanced at the clock. 2:13 in the morning. My first thought was a drunk neighbor. My second thought was an emergency from the base. Then I heard it, faint through the door, a woman's voice calling my name. Maddie, please, open up. I was already out of bed before I even recognized who it was. I grabbed my sweatshirt, my off-duty pistol from the nightstand, and crept to the door. My apartment was small, one of those converted condos near Colorado Springs, quiet enough that I could hear my own pulse when I turned the deadbolt. When I pulled the door open, the cold hit first, then the smell of metal and rain. Savannah was standing there, hair tangled, face swollen, one side of her mouth bleeding. In her arms was Chloe, her little girl, wrapped in a thin blanket, eyes wide and glassy with fear. For a second, I couldn't move. The last time I'd seen my sister, she'd been smiling in a Christmas photo she posted online, pretending her marriage was fine. That was months ago. Jesus, Savannah, what happened? She staggered inside before I could finish. Her knees buckled, and I caught her just in time. Chloe clung tighter to her neck, whispering something I couldn't catch. Savannah's hands were ice cold. Don't let him find me, she said, her voice thin as paper. Please, Maddie. I locked the door, flicked on the lights, and half carried her to the couch. Chloe slid onto the cushions beside her, shivering, her lips pressed together like she'd been told not to speak. Blood smeared on my hands when I pulled the blanket away from Savannah's shoulder. Purple bruises, fresh ones, lined her collarbone. I'm calling 911, I said. No. She tried to sit up, panic flashing across her face. No hospitals, no cops. You're bleeding, Sav. You need help. He'll find me. He always does. Her words chilled me more than the wind pouring through the open door. I'd seen fear before, real fear, in soldiers pinned down overseas, in victims who'd lost everything. But this was different. This was personal. Who? I asked, even though I already knew. She didn't answer. Her head fell back against the couch, eyes fluttering shut. Chloe whimpered and reached for her hand. I crouched beside the kid and brushed her hair back. It's okay, honey. You're safe here. I'm going to get your mom some help. While I spoke, I reached for my phone and dialed. The dispatcher's voice came through steady, asking for details. I gave the address, the injuries, told them it was domestic violence. As I hung up, my phone vibrated again. A new message appeared on the screen. It was from Mom. Patricia Blake. Don't save her. You don't owe that traitor anything. For a moment, everything in me went still. The room, the breathing, the faint sound of sirens somewhere in the distance. I stared at the message, unable to process it. My own mother. I looked over at Savannah. Her chest rose and fell shallowly, a streak of dried blood across her jaw. I looked at Chloe, clutching the blanket like a lifeline. The kid didn't need to hear her grandmother's venom or see me hesitate. I pocketed the phone. Whatever Mom meant, whatever old poison was driving her, it didn't matter now. I wasn't leaving my sister to die on my couch. The sirens grew louder, closer. Blue and red light flickered through the curtains. Chloe's eyes darted to the window. Is he coming? She whispered. No, sweetheart. Those are the good guys. She nodded but didn't let go of her mother's arm. When the EMTs knocked, I opened the door and stepped aside. Two paramedics in navy jackets swept in, calm, professional. I gave them the quick rundown, then helped them lift Savannah onto the stretcher. She moaned once, barely conscious, when they strapped her in. The taller medic asked if I was family. Sister, I said, you can ride with us if you want. I looked at Chloe, still sitting on the couch, tiny hands gripping the edge. She hadn't spoken since the first knock. I scooped her up, wrapped her in the blanket, and followed them out into the freezing night. The air smelled of snow. Streetlights painted everything in a dull yellow haze. As the paramedics loaded Savannah into the ambulance, Chloe buried her face against my shoulder. Will Mommy be okay? She will, I promise. I didn't know if that was true, but it was all I had to give her. The back doors slammed shut. I climbed in, holding Chloe close as we pulled away. Through the window, I could see the lights of the apartment fading behind us, the street empty except for the shadows. Inside the ambulance, the machines beeped steadily. The medic asked questions I barely heard. My mind was somewhere else, replaying the message on my phone. Don't save her. Why would Mom say that? What did she know that I didn't? Savannah's hand twitched, and one of the medics leaned over to check her pulse. She murmured something I couldn't make out. A single word, maybe. I caught part of it. Money. I pressed my palm over Chloe's ear, hoping she wouldn't hear. The child had seen too much already. When we turned onto the highway, the flashing lights reflected off the glass. I caught my reflection in the window, pale, hollow-eyed, wearing the same expression I'd seen in combat photos, the look of someone bracing for a battle they didn't ask for. Only this time, there were no uniforms, no orders, no clear enemy, just a broken family, a bleeding sister, and a mother whose message still burned in my mind. I tightened my grip on Chloe as the ambulance sped toward Denver General, the siren echoing through the cold. Whatever this was, whatever nightmare we had stepped into, it wasn't ending tonight. It was only beginning. Chapter 2. Wounds Beyond the Skin. By the time we reached Denver General, dawn had begun to creep over the city. The sky was a dull gray, the kind that makes everything feel suspended, waiting. Inside the ambulance, the smell of antiseptic and metal mixed with something heavier, something human. Savannah was barely conscious, murmuring in short, broken breaths. Chloe had fallen asleep against my shoulder, her small body limp from exhaustion. The ER doors opened in a rush of fluorescent light and voices. Nurses took over, their hands fast and efficient. I followed until one of them stopped me at the curtain. Family can wait outside, ma'am. I wanted to say I wasn't family, not the kind that had been around lately, but I nodded and stepped back. They wheeled Savannah down the hall. The gurney wheels echoed against the tile until the sound faded. I sat in a plastic chair beside the vending machines. Chloe curled up beside me. Her little fingers still gripped that silver star pendant I'd given her when she was a baby. She turned it over and over, like it was a secret key to safety. After a few minutes, a nurse in blue scrubs came over with a clipboard. She explained Savannah had 2 fractured ribs, bruising around her stomach, but no internal bleeding. She would need to stay overnight for observation. I nodded, thanked her, then turned to Chloe. The girl's eyes were too wide for her age. Are you hungry, kiddo? She shook her head. Do you want to call your dad? Her lips pressed tight, and she whispered, barely audible. Grandma said, I can't tell. Tell what? Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away. The pendant swung in her hand, catching the light. I felt my stomach twist. Whatever had happened, it went deeper than bruises. It wasn't just fear, it was loyalty mixed with confusion, the kind children learn too early in homes that teach them secrets instead of safety. I stroked her hair and told her to rest. She leaned against my arm and closed her eyes again. I stared at the wall across from us, a faded poster about domestic violence. The words blurred, but I knew them by heart. I'd seen too many cases overseas, too many wives and mothers hiding under the name of family. When Savannah was stable enough, they moved her into a shared room. The doctor said she would wake soon. I stood by her bed, listening to the slow rhythm of the heart monitor. She looked fragile, nothing like the sister I grew up chasing through cornfields in Kansas, the one who used to dare me to climb trees higher than I should. Now she looked small, folded in on herself. Her eyes opened a crack, finding mine. Maddie. I moved closer, taking her hand. I'm here. You're safe. She tried to speak, but the words came out like a whisper. Don't tell Mom where I am. Promise me. I squeezed her fingers. I promise. She closed her eyes again, as if the promise itself gave her permission to sleep. I sat down and watched her breathe, the machine beeping steady beside her. Outside the window, the morning sun finally broke through the haze, streaking the glass with pale gold. When the police arrived 2 hours later, I was in the hallway with a cup of bad coffee. Two officers introduced themselves, polite but detached. They asked if Savannah was ready to give a statement. I told them she wasn't. They pressed, saying it was procedure. I told them they could wait. Eventually, one of them asked if I knew who did it. I stared into my coffee, then said quietly, her husband. They exchanged a look, but didn't write it down. They'd need Savannah's confirmation to act. When they left, I felt the weight of it settle between my ribs. Procedure was just another word for delay. Later that afternoon, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Deborah Langley, my old attorney from the military, the one who defended me during a misconduct inquiry that wasn't my fault. She'd moved into private practice since then, focusing on domestic violence and veterans' rights. When she picked up, her voice was as sharp as I remembered. Madison Cole? I didn't expect to hear from you again. I told her everything. The bruises, the fear, the message from Mom. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I thought she'd hung up. All right, she said finally. I'll take the case. Bring me whatever paperwork you can find. And Maddie, don't talk to the press. Don't confront the husband yet. Let me handle it clean. I agreed. Clean sounded good. I'd had enough of messy. By evening, the hospital corridors had gone quiet. Savannah slept. Chloe colored on a paper menu someone had given her. I sat in the chair, half awake, half waiting. Around 9, a nurse brought a change of clothes for Savannah, and I decided to head home to grab some things for her. Her coat was hanging on the back of the chair, still damp from the night before. I picked it up to shake it out, and something slipped from the pocket. A sealed envelope, the kind used for bank mail. My name wasn't on it, but curiosity won. Inside was a single folded sheet, a bank statement from Western Plains Credit Union. I skimmed it, expecting ordinary transactions, groceries, utilities. Instead, there were large transfers from an account belonging to Kyle Miller, co-signer, Patricia Blake. My chest went cold. I read the line again. The amounts weren't random, they were scheduled, repeating every month, thousands of dollars. I didn't understand it yet, but I knew what it felt like to stumble across the first clue of something rotten. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Chloe had fallen asleep in the chair again, the silver star pendant pressed to her chest. I watched her for a long moment, then looked back at the window. The city lights shimmered on the glass, and for the first time, I felt the edge of something I couldn't name. This wasn't just about violence, it was about control, about money, about the kind of betrayal that grows quietly behind family photos and polite smiles. I tucked the envelope into my bag, turned off the light, and stepped into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of bleach and winter. Somewhere down the corridor, a machine beeped steadily, like a pulse that refused to quit. I walked toward the exit, the paper heavy in my bag, knowing that whatever I had just found was the beginning of a trail, and it was leading straight back to people I thought I understood. Chapter 3. The shadow behind her mother's name. The morning light looked too clean for what I was about to do. The drive from Denver to Colorado Springs felt shorter than it should have, the mountains cutting through the haze like blades. I told myself I only wanted answers, that it was just a conversation between mother and daughter, but deep down I knew better. Patricia's neighborhood was the kind of place that looked perfect from the outside. Neatly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, flags still out from Veterans Day. Her house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, painted beige with white shutters, the same color it had been since my father died. She never changed a thing, as if paint could hold a ghost. When I parked at the curb, her car was already in the driveway. She must have been up early. I walked to the front door, my boots crunching over frost. For a second I considered turning back. Then I knocked. The door opened almost instantly. Patricia stood there, wearing a pale sweater and pearl earrings. She looked exactly as she had at every holiday I remembered. Pressed, perfect, and impossible to read. "Maddie," she said, with that careful smile she used for strangers. "I wasn't expecting you." I held up the coffee I'd brought from a gas station. "Figured you'd be up." She stepped aside. The house smelled like lemon polish and something sweet burning in the oven. Family pictures lined the hallway, my father's uniform framed beside my high school photo. The same photo she'd once told me made me look too severe for a girl. We sat at the kitchen table. She adjusted a vase of artificial roses that didn't need adjusting. I placed the envelope from Savannah's coat on the table. The logo of Western Plains Credit Union caught the light. "Do you know anything about this?" Her hand froze midair. Then she laughed softly. "I was just helping your sister manage her money. You know how careless she is." That word, careless, landed like a slap. Savannah had never been careless. She'd been terrified, exhausted, trapped, but never careless. "I don't think this is her account," I said. "The transfers came from Kyle's name." "And yours." Her eyes hardened just a fraction, enough to tell me I was getting close to something she didn't want seen. "I opened one for her when she married him," she said. "He's not good with bills either, so you co-signed on his account?" "I helped," she said, voice rising. "I help people. It's what I do." I stared at her across the table, at the neat hair and perfect nails, the mask of calm she'd practiced for years. I used to think that made her strong. Now it just looked like armor. "Mom, this isn't just about helping. These are VA benefit deposits." "Why is your name on them?" She exhaled through her nose, sharp and deliberate. Then she leaned back and looked at the framed photo of my father above the stove. "Your father died for this country," she said. "And what did we get?" "Nothing. Not a cent from the government he served. They called it a paperwork issue." "We lost the house, Maddie." "I had 2 girls to feed." "That was 15 years ago," I said. "You can't fix that by stealing now." She smiled, thin and bitter. "Stealing? No. Correcting. If the government can forget the people who serve it, then it's only fair we take back what was owed." The words hit harder than I expected. For a second, I almost understood. She had spent years scraping by, working 2 jobs, pretending the resentment hadn't turned into hate. "You're telling me you opened fake accounts in dead relatives' names and called that justice?" Her hand slammed against the table. Her voice cracked for the first time. "You think you know what justice is? You sit in that uniform, playing hero while your family suffers." I kept my voice steady, but my heart was pounding. "Savannah found out, didn't she? That's why you're angry. That's why she left." She turned away, staring out the window at the pale light. I warned her to stay quiet. She never listened. Always had to be the good one, like her father. I took a slow breath. You threatened her, didn't you? Her shoulders stiffened. Don't twist this, Maddie. I did what I had to do for this family. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I thought about Chloe in that hospital room, whispering that Grandma said she couldn't tell. Mom, this isn't family anymore, I said. It's corruption. She turned back, eyes glassy, voice low. I did this for family. You only judge. That was it. The part of me that still wanted to find something human in her went quiet. I stood up, my chair scraping against the tile. I wanted to say something that would make her understand, but there was nothing left to say. On my way out, she called after me, voice suddenly small. You don't know everything, Maddie. You never did. Maybe not, I said, but I know enough. Outside, the cold air hit like a slap. I walked fast to my car, my hands shaking. I sat behind the wheel, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. The mountains looked sharp and far away, the kind of blue that always felt honest compared to people. I started the engine, turned on the heat, and leaned back. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I expected Deborah, or maybe the hospital. It was a message from an unknown number. Touch the VA and you'll lose your badge. Signed, K. The letters stared back at me, glowing in the dim light of the dashboard. My first instinct was anger. Then came something colder. Whoever had sent it knew exactly where to hit. I looked up at the house. The curtains had shifted slightly, like someone was watching. Maybe Patricia. Maybe no one. I didn't wait to find out. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, the message still burning in my mind. Whatever line my mother had crossed, I was already on the other side of it, and now there was no going back. Chapter 4. The Quiet Investigation. The drive back to Fort Carson felt longer than it should have. The radio played static, and I kept replaying the message in my mind. Whoever sent it knew about the VA, knew about me, and knew enough to threaten what I had left of a career. By the time I reached the gate, the sun was low, streaking the mountains in shades of copper and gray. The guard waved me through, but his eyes lingered on me longer than usual, as if even strangers could sense when something inside you had started to break. Captain Raymond Raines was in his office when I knocked. He was the kind of man who had lived too long in regulation gray, hair cropped sharp, desk spotless, every file aligned like soldiers in formation. He looked up from a stack of reports, eyes narrowing slightly when he saw me. Cole, he said, leaning back in his chair. I heard about your sister. Yes, sir. She's stable now. Good. He paused, then folded his hands. I'm going to say this once. Keep family business out of uniform. I don't need headlines about a military cop chasing personal drama. I understood, sir. He studied me a beat longer, maybe trying to decide if I really did. Dismissed, he said finally. I left, but the words stayed with me all afternoon. Keep family business out of uniform. The problem was, I didn't know how to separate the two anymore. My mother's fraud had wrapped itself around my father's name, his service, his death. The same system I'd sworn to protect was now the one being exploited by my own blood. That night I met Sergeant Dean Hill at a diner outside the base. We'd served together overseas. He had the same steady calm that had gotten us through too many nights under fire. When I told him what I suspected, he didn't ask why, he just asked what I needed. Public transaction data, I said. Anything tied to Patricia Blake or Kyle Miller. Hill stirred his coffee, nodded once, then pulled out his laptop. Give me 48 hours. If they're dumb enough to use traceable cards, I'll find them. He was faster than that. By the next evening, he sent me a secure file link. When I opened it, my stomach turned. There were records of flights to Las Vegas, hotel stays at resorts, charges at designer stores in Miami, tens of thousands of dollars, all within the last 6 months. The accounts matched the same bank on Savannah's statement. I called Deborah and told her what we had. She didn't sound surprised. These cases always start small, she said. Someone finds a loophole, convinces themselves it's harmless. Then the greed sets in. Bring me everything. I printed the records, every page a reminder of how far my mother had fallen. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table, reading line after line until my eyes burned. I didn't notice the sound at first, a dull thud against the door. When I opened it, Kyle Miller stood on my porch. His clothes were wrinkled, his jaw tight, eyes bloodshot. The smell of whiskey hit me before he spoke. You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? He said. I kept my voice even. You need to leave, Kyle. He stepped closer, his boots scraping the concrete. Don't act like you're the hero here. We didn't steal anything. We took what was ours. The government screwed your father, screwed all of us. That money was for Chloe, I said, for her care. His face twisted. She'll be fine. She's a kid. It's not like she needs all of it. I felt my hand tighten around the door frame. Walk away before I call the police. He smirked, leaning in just enough that I could see the veins pulsing in his neck. You think you're so clean, soldier girl. Your mom's not innocent in this. She told me everything. What do you mean? He laughed, short and mean. She said if I kept quiet, she'd cut me in. Said the money was rightfully hers anyway. I helped her, Maddie. We both did. You should be thanking me. I didn't answer. My phone was in my pocket, the voice recorder already running. I let him talk. You're going to drop this, he said, or you'll lose everything you've got left. Then he turned and stumbled down the steps, muttering something I couldn't hear. His truck started a second later, engine roaring as he sped off into the dark. I stood there for a long time after he left, the cold air biting through my shirt. My hand shook when I stopped the recording. His voice filled the silence, ugly and real. Your mom said if I kept quiet, she'd cut me in. I replayed it once, twice, until the words were burned into me. Proof, not suspicion, not rumor. Proof. I sent the audio to Deborah with a short message. I also forwarded it to a contact she'd mentioned earlier that day, Agent Thomas Morrow, from the VA Office of Inspector General. Within minutes I received an encrypted reply. We'll handle it discreetly. Do not confront them further. I sat back and stared at the ceiling. The hum of the refrigerator sounded too loud. Chloe's drawing still sat on my counter, a crayon sketch of a house with 3 stick figures holding hands. I wondered if she'd drawn it before or after the night her mother came running to my door. Outside, headlights swept briefly across my window. I froze until they passed. Paranoia was setting in fast. Maybe it wasn't paranoia anymore. I shut off the lights and double-checked the locks. My phone buzzed with another message, but this time it wasn't a threat. It was from Hill. You sure you want to keep going? This could blow back hard. I typed back one sentence. It already has. Then I turned off the screen, sat in the dark, and let the weight of it settle. The web was tightening, just like I'd felt that night in the hospital. Only now I wasn't just following threads. I was part of the snare. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled across the plains, the sound sharp and lonely. I took a slow breath and whispered to no one. Maybe to my father's ghost. Maybe to myself. I'm not letting them win. The words steadied me enough to move. I saved the recording to an external drive, locked it in a desk drawer, and finally went to bed. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it brought dreams of sand and sirens, of my mother's face behind a courtroom glass, and of Chloe, watching from the hallway, clutching that silver star in her hand. Chapter 5. A War on Two Fronts. The next morning started with an email that made my stomach drop. The subject line read, Notice of administrative suspension. The message was short, impersonal, and cold. Effective immediately, Officer Madison Cole is relieved of duty pending investigation of unauthorized data access related to Department of Veterans Affairs records. I read it 3 times, then leaned back in my chair. Someone had filed a complaint. Anonymous. It didn't take much imagination to guess who. When I showed up at Fort Carson to turn in my badge and sidearm, Captain Rains was waiting for me in his office. He didn't look surprised, which meant he'd already known. His voice was calm, but his eyes told me he was tired of the politics that came with doing the right thing. "This came from higher up," he said. "My hands are tied." "You know I didn't break any laws," I said. "I accessed public transaction data. That's not classified." He nodded once, closing the file in front of him. "You've made enemies, Cole, and they're playing dirty." His tone softened, barely above a whisper. "Prove you're right, and I'll back you. But until then, keep your head down." I left the office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. I had nothing left to lose except the truth, and that was exactly what made me dangerous to them. Deborah met me that afternoon in her downtown office, a space full of old books and a coffee maker that never stopped running. She had already filed for a restraining order to protect Savannah and Chloe. The paperwork was stacked on her desk, crisp and precise. "They'll serve him by tonight," she said. "After that, he's legally barred from contacting your sister or going near her residence or the hospital." She paused, studying me over the rim of her glasses. "The VA investigation is moving fast. Agent Morrow confirmed they're auditing every account linked to Patricia Blake. It's big, Maddie. They're talking multiple states, multiple shell names. Good. Maybe now they'll finally see what she's done." Deborah sighed. "They'll see. But people like your mother, they don't surrender. They drag everyone down with them." By evening, the story had already hit local news. The headline flashed across every screen at the diner where I stopped for coffee. "Veteran accused of disability benefit fraud." My father's photo appeared beside the article. The same military portrait Mom kept framed in her hallway. Underneath, a smaller caption: "Investigation involves relatives of deceased service member." I sat there, staring at the screen, the chatter around me fading into static. The story had gone public, and now there was no way to contain it. My last name was out there, my badge suspended, my family's shame wrapped in red, white, blue graphics for every stranger to dissect. When I got to the hospital that night, I could already feel the tension before I reached Savannah's floor. 2 security guards stood near the elevators, radioing each other in short bursts. The nurse at the desk looked up, her expression pale. "Is everything all right?" I asked. Her hand shook slightly as she pointed down the hall. "Room 412, your brother-in-law's here." I started running before she finished. From halfway down the corridor, I heard the shouting. Kyle's voice, raw and furious, bouncing off the sterile walls. "She's lying," he was yelling. "She's trying to ruin me." Savannah's voice trembled from inside the room. "Please, just leave." When I turned the corner, I saw him. He was standing by the bed, knife in hand, the blade catching the fluorescent light. His face was flushed, sweat dripping down his temple. A security guard lay on the floor beside him, dazed but conscious. "Kyle, drop it," I said. He spun toward me, wild-eyed. "You think you can take my family away from me? You think you're some kind of hero?" I took a slow step forward, hands raised. "Nobody's taking anything. Put the knife down and we can talk." He laughed, sharp and broken. "Talk? You're the reason she's doing this. You poisoned her against me." I moved closer, inch by inch, until I was within reach. His hand shook. For a second, I thought he might actually listen. Then he lunged. Training kicked in before thought. I sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, twisted hard, the knife clattering to the floor. The sound of metal hitting tile was louder than the shouting. I shoved him against the wall, pinning his arms. Security rushed in, cuffing him while I backed away, my pulse hammering. Savannah was crying, Chloe screaming in the corner. I took a breath and forced my voice steady. "It's over, Sav. He can't hurt you now." The officers led him out, shouting threats as they dragged him down the hallway. "You'll regret this, Maddie. You'll regret everything." It wasn't until later, when things quieted, that I realized how right he might be. The next morning, the news updated their story. Footage of the hospital incident looped on every channel. A local anchor read the statement: Kyle Miller, recently accused in a federal benefits investigation, was detained last night after a violent altercation. His wife remains under protection. Sources close to the family report a military police officer relative was involved. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Reporters wanted comments. Strangers sent messages calling me a disgrace, a hero, a traitor, sometimes all three in one sentence. By noon, I was back at Deborah's office. She looked up from her computer with an expression that told me she already knew. "He's out on bail," she said flatly. "What?" Patricia posted it. She walked in with her own lawyer this morning and covered the bond herself. I felt the room tilt for a second. My mother had bailed out the man who nearly stabbed her daughter. "She's claiming you abused your authority as a suspended officer," Deborah continued. "Says you provoked him, used excessive force." I laughed once, hollow. "She's trying to destroy me." Deborah met my eyes. "No, she's trying to win." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just family anymore. It wasn't private. It was war. I left her office and stepped into the cold afternoon air. Cars passed on the street. People went about their lives, unaware that mine had just narrowed to two simple fronts: the system I'd sworn to protect, and the family determined to burn it to the ground. I got into my car and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. Somewhere out there, my mother was sitting in a courtroom smiling at reporters, claiming righteousness. Somewhere, Kyle was laughing with his lawyer, planning his next move. And somewhere, in a hospital room that still smelled of fear and antiseptic, my sister was trying to explain to an 8-year-old girl why family could be the most dangerous word in the world. I started the engine and pulled into traffic, the city lights flickering on as the sky turned orange. It was only the beginning of the second battle. The first had been for survival. The next would be for the truth. Chapter 6: The Truth and Its Cost. The days that followed blurred together. One long stretch of court filings, phone calls, and waiting. I woke each morning to emails from Deborah and reports from Agent Thomas Morrow of the VA Office of Inspector General. He worked methodically, his messages precise, never emotional. Each one added another piece to a picture I had stopped hoping would ever be complete. 3 accounts, he wrote, all fraudulent, all tied to your mother's social security number. Different names, different states, one in Nebraska, one in Texas, and one right here in Colorado. Each account had drawn disability benefits from the VA under deceased veterans' records. The signatures matched. The transfers led straight to Patricia Blake. When I read that last line, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sick. She hadn't done it once, or by mistake, or even out of desperation. It had been deliberate, calculated, repeated. By the third week, the investigation reached Kyle. He finally broke. Morrow called me into his office in Denver to hear it firsthand. Kyle sat across from us, his wrists in handcuffs, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. "I didn't plan it," he said, voice shaking. "I was drowning in debt. Patricia found out, said she could help. She told me how to move the money, how to file fake claims. She said the government owed it to her anyway." Morrow didn't react, he just clicked his pen, writing in his notebook. "Did she ever threaten you?" Kyle hesitated. "She didn't have to. When Patricia talked, you listened. When the interview ended, they let him out. I stayed behind, watching Morrow close the file. He looked at me. "She's the architect. We have enough for a federal indictment." The words should have felt like relief. Instead, they felt like a sentence neither of us wanted to pronounce. 2 days later, I received official notice of my military hearing. It was scheduled for the end of the month. The charges weren't criminal but procedural: unauthorized data access, misconduct under military code, breach of professional boundaries. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years enforcing rules I was now accused of breaking in order to expose a crime no one else wanted to touch. The hearing was held in a sterile room on base, the kind that always smelled faintly of old paper and gun oil. Captain Rains sat at the head of the table with 2 other officers beside him. My palms were damp, but my voice stayed steady as I gave my statement. "I accessed public data," I said. "I did not use restricted systems or military credentials. I was following evidence connected to an active federal investigation." One of the officers interrupted. "Why not let the proper channels handle it?" "Because the proper channels were being manipulated by the people I was investigating." The room went quiet. Rains leaned back, his fingers steepled under his chin. "If you must choose between rank and what's right, what would you choose?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I'll choose what's right. Every time." The silence that followed was long enough for my pulse to echo in my ears. Then Rains spoke quietly, almost to himself. "We don't need perfect soldiers. We need honest ones." He signed the paper in front of him, then slid it to me. "You're placed under review, but you're cleared to continue assisting the federal case. Don't make me regret it." When I stepped outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. The decision didn't erase the doubt or the fear, but it gave me back a piece of myself. For the first time in months, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Savannah found her courage soon after. Deborah arranged a meeting at her office. When I walked in, Savannah was already there, sitting straight-backed but pale. Chloe played quietly in the corner, drawing hearts on a piece of paper. "I can't keep hiding," Savannah said. "If Mom goes to prison and I stay silent, then I'm no better. You don't have to do this alone," I told her. "I know. That's why I'm ready." Deborah smiled faintly. "We'll prepare your statement. You'll be safe." The word safe felt fragile, like glass. But I wanted to believe it. Later that week, Morrow requested my presence during Patricia's interrogation. He thought my presence might provoke honesty. I didn't tell him that the only thing my mother responded to was control. The room was small, just a table and 3 chairs. Patricia sat across from me, wearing a gray suit and that same detached calm she'd worn my entire childhood. Morrow asked the questions, patient and precise. She denied everything until he slid the documents across the table. The signatures, the bank transfers, the emails. Her mask cracked, but not the way I expected. She didn't panic or beg. She just looked at me. "You think you're better than me," she said slowly. "You sit there in your uniform, pretending you're righteous. But I learned from the same government you serve." The words hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the truth was complicated. We had both been raised by the same system, both taught that loyalty and survival sometimes blurred into the same thing. The difference was what we did when that line appeared. Morrow ended the session there. As the guards escorted her out, she turned once more, her voice cold. "You'll see, Madison. They all take what they can. I just did it first." I stayed seated after she left. My hands were trembling under the table, but I didn't want anyone to see. Morrow placed a hand on my shoulder before he left. It wasn't sympathy, it was acknowledgement. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with the lights off, the sound of the refrigerator, the only thing keeping time. My phone buzzed with updates, notifications, emails. I ignored them all. Outside, the wind carried the faint hum of traffic from the highway. I thought about what my mother had said. Maybe she truly believed it. Maybe she thought corruption was inherited, something passed down like eye color or blood type. But as I looked around my quiet apartment, at the empty coffee cup on the counter and the worn boots by the door, I knew I didn't have to accept that legacy. For the first time, I felt what truth really costs. It isn't just sacrifice. It's the loss of the illusion that justice and love can coexist without pain. The case was moving forward. Indictments were coming. My uniform was still folded neatly in my locker, waiting. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. Whatever came, I would face it standing up. Chapter 7. When justice speaks, the courthouse smelled of rain and coffee, that mix of nerves and paper that lingers before verdicts are read. It was April, the kind of spring day that looked gentle from the outside but felt sharp once you stepped into it. The trial had dragged on for weeks, every hearing another reminder of how far my family had fallen. Savannah sat in the front row beside Deborah, her hands clasped so tightly I could see her knuckles pale. Chloe sat on her lap, small braces strapped to her legs, her silver star pendant catching the courtroom light. I stood near the aisle, close enough to hear but far enough to breathe. Judge Howard Mills entered with quiet authority. He was older, the kind of man whose words carried weight without force. The courtroom fell silent as he adjusted his glasses and looked down at the papers in front of him. The evidence in this case is clear. Patricia Blake knowingly established fraudulent benefit accounts across multiple states, manipulating federal systems for personal gain. Kyle Miller knowingly assisted and benefited from these crimes. My mother didn't flinch. She stared straight ahead, her face blank, shoulders pulled back like she was posing for a photograph. Kyle sat beside her, smaller than I remembered, his head bowed, hands trembling. Judge Mills continued, "For your crimes, the court sentences Patricia Blake to 6 years in federal prison for fraud and money laundering. Kyle Miller is sentenced to 4 years in state custody for conspiracy and embezzlement." Savannah let out a sound that was part breath, part relief. Deborah placed a steadying hand on her arm. Chloe turned her head toward me, eyes wide, as if waiting for permission to smile. The judge wasn't done. The remaining funds seized from the fraudulent accounts will be placed into a trust for minor Chloe Miller to be used exclusively for medical care and rehabilitation expenses. My throat tightened. For all the pain, something good had come out of the wreckage. When the gavel struck, the sound cracked through the room like thunder. Patricia turned her head then, slowly, deliberately, until her eyes found mine. "You destroyed this family," she said. Her voice carried just enough to be heard, cold and sharp. I took a step closer, keeping my voice low. "You destroyed it yourself." For a moment she looked almost human, her mouth trembling, but the expression vanished as quickly as it came. The guards took her by the arms, handcuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights. Cameras flashed from the hallway beyond the door. I stood still, watching as she was led out, her heels clicking against the floor like punctuation marks to a story that had gone on too long. Kyle followed, silent, eyes on the ground. He didn't look back. Outside the courtroom, reporters crowded near the steps, their microphones rising like a field of metal reeds. Deborah blocked them with calm precision, telling them there would be no statements today. Savannah clutched Chloe's hand, her face streaked with tears she didn't try to hide. "You did it," she whispered when I reached her. "You made them listen." "No," I said softly. "You did. You told the truth." Deborah exhaled, finally allowing herself a small smile. "Justice takes time," she said, but it came. Behind us, a commotion caught my attention. Dr. Elaine Carter, Chloe's physical therapist, had knelt beside the little girl on the marble floor. Chloe stood with her braces locked, her small hands gripping the doctor's fingers. The air seemed to still as she took one step, then another, wobbling but determined. Savannah covered her mouth, a sob breaking into laughter. Deborah wiped at her eyes. I stood frozen, watching Chloe's face light up with pride. She turned toward me, breathless. Look, Aunt Mattie, I'm walking. I couldn't speak. All I could do was nod and smile as the courthouse corridor filled with something pure, something untouched by the ugliness that had brought us there. Later that afternoon, I returned to Fort Carson. The sky had cleared, the snow melting off the distant peaks. When I walked into Captain Raines's office, he was standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back. "You've been cleared, Cole," he said without turning around. "The Army still needs people like you." I stood at attention out of habit, unsure what to say. "Thank you, sir." He turned then, a faint smile ghosting across his face. "You fought a war most soldiers never see. You did good. Now get some rest before I give you more paperwork." That was as close to praise as I'd ever get from him. I saluted, then left the building. The air outside felt different, lighter. At the edge of the parking lot, I stopped beside my truck and looked back at the mountains. They rose sharp and endless, their peaks catching the last light of the day. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe all the way down. Justice didn't feel triumphant. It didn't feel clean. It felt like standing in the wreckage of a storm and realizing the ground was finally still. That night, as I drove back toward Denver, I passed the courthouse again. The crowd was gone, the steps empty, except for a single news van packing up. In my mind, I saw two images overlapping. My mother, her wrists bound, eyes still filled with defiance, and Chloe, upright and smiling, her silver star glinting against the light, guilt and healing, both real, both mine to carry. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but as the highway stretched ahead under a rising moon, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not victory, not peace, just the quiet certainty that justice had finally spoken, and I was still here to hear it. Chapter 8. Healing and karma. A year can pass quietly without you noticing how much has changed. The seasons turned over Colorado like pages in a book, each one softer than the last. By the spring of 2025, the storm had finally broken apart into something that looked like peace. Savannah and Chloe had moved into a small yellow house at the edge of Colorado Springs, not far from the base. It sat near a field where wildflowers grew thick after every rain, the kind of place where the air always smelled clean. I visited often, sometimes bringing flowers from the farmer's market, sometimes books, sometimes nothing at all. Savannah would make coffee and sit on the porch with me while Chloe played in the yard. The girl had grown taller, her braces now bright blue instead of silver. She could walk across the lawn by herself, slow and careful, pausing every few steps to steady her balance. Each time she did, she would grin like she'd conquered something enormous. Savannah had color in her face again. She was working part-time at the library downtown, taking evening classes when she could. The weight that used to hang around her voice was gone. She still carried scars, but they no longer controlled her. Sometimes we talked about the past, sometimes we didn't. When we did, it wasn't with bitterness, just the quiet understanding that survival had changed us in ways we couldn't undo. One afternoon, I stopped by after work. The air smelled of lilac and cut grass. Chloe ran toward me, her arms open, her steps uneven but determined. I caught her easily and spun her once before setting her down. "Aunt Mattie, I got an A on my spelling test," she said proudly. I smiled. "I knew you would. You're tougher than anyone I know." She laughed, the sound bright and free. It struck me how much her laughter sounded like Savannah's when we were kids. Inside, Savannah was folding laundry, while the radio hummed softly in the background. A local news segment mentioned the VA fraud case again, summarizing it for some anniversary story. Military officer exposes federal benefit scheme. My name was there, though it didn't feel like mine anymore. The reporter's voice was calm, clinical, missing the years of pain that had come before those neat sentences. Patricia was still serving her 6-year sentence at the federal women's facility in Kansas. Kyle was in custody in Arizona, his parole hearings postponed after disciplinary issues. Deborah still sent updates occasionally, short and factual. I rarely read them the same day. There were some things that didn't deserve more space in my head than they had already taken. After dinner, Savannah and Chloe went outside to water the flowers. I stayed inside, sitting at the old wooden desk by the window. A notebook lay open in front of me. I hadn't written in months, but that night, the words came easily. Justice isn't revenge. It's protection. It's the quiet work of keeping harm from growing roots again. Karma doesn't need our push. It only needs time. I set the pen down and looked outside. The sun was lowering behind the mountains, painting everything in gold. Chloe stumbled over a patch of uneven grass, caught herself, and then laughed like it was part of the game. Savannah stood behind her, watching with that gentle pride only mothers carry. For a moment, I let myself just sit there and breathe. The sound of their laughter drifted through the window. It mixed with the hum of the radio, the chirp of birds settling into the trees, and the faint buzz of the evening air. There was no court, no uniform, no fear, just life moving forward. Later, when I said goodbye, Savannah hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for what you did, but for not giving up." I smiled against her shoulder. "Family isn't about being perfect, it's about trying again." She nodded, her eyes soft. "You gave us the chance to try." On the drive back to my apartment, the roads were quiet, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky, and I caught my reflection in the windshield. For the first time in a long while, I didn't look like someone running from a war. I looked like someone who had finally come home. When I reached my place, I sat on the balcony with a mug of tea, the notebook still open beside me. The air was cool, the kind that carried the promise of rain. I thought about my father, about what he would have said if he could see how far we'd come. I thought about my mother too, about how easily love can twist when it's built on resentment instead of care. Then I thought about Chloe's laughter, the way she kept trying even when she fell. That, more than anything, felt like the answer to everything we had survived. I wrote one last line in the notebook before closing it. "Never let silence hide the truth. Speak when you can." Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the hills, low and distant. I stayed there a while, listening to the rhythm of the coming rain, feeling it settle into the quiet spaces that guilt used to fill. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by what had happened. I felt grateful to still be standing, still hearing, still learning how to forgive. The storm had passed. What remained was real, and it was enough. If you've ever stood where I stood, waiting for justice to speak, remember this. Truth may take time, but it always finds its voice, and when it does, let it remind you that courage and honesty are never wasted. They build the kind of healing that lasts, even after betrayal.